My name is Elijah Hawthorne, 69 years old. And tonight, my friend, I learned that sometimes the people you die for are the ones who quietly bury you alive. It happened 3 months ago, on a quiet Thursday evening, the kind where the world seems too calm before a storm. I had been packing for the trip of my dreams, a 3-week tour of Europe with my son David, his wife Vivian, and my 2 grandkids, Maya and Caleb. I'd spent $42,000 on the entire vacation, my entire pension, and part of the inheritance my late wife Rose had left me. That trip was supposed to be my final big memory with them before old age caught up completely. Paris, Rome, Barcelona, the cities I once sent clients to when I owned Hawthorne Travels. After decades of planning other people's adventures, it was finally time for mine. But destiny had something else in mind. That night, I realized I'd left the passports at David's house. It wasn't far, just across town in Brookhaven. I still had the spare keys he'd given me years ago, for emergencies. Funny, isn't it? I never knew the real emergency would be discovering who my son truly was. The house smelled like Vivian's gumbo when I slipped quietly through the back door. I didn't want to wake anyone. The plan was simple: grab the passports from the drawer, head home, finish packing. But as I passed the hallway, voices drifted from the kitchen. Laughter. Clinking glasses. And then I heard the words that froze my blood. "That old man spent a fortune on this trip," David said, laughing. "But he's not coming with us." At first, I thought I'd misheard him. But then Vivian's sharp voice followed. "What if he finds out?" David chuckled. "He won't. He believes everything I tell him. I'll just say the flight got overbooked. He'll stay home like the fool he's always been, and we'll enjoy Paris alone." The keys in my hands slipped and clinked softly against the wall. I froze. My chest tightened. My breath caught somewhere between disbelief and heartbreak. 34 years of being a father, and this was my reward. They kept talking, their voices cruel and confident. "He's been giving me money for everything," David continued. "The car, the kids' tuition, your doctor bills, and he never asks questions. The man's basically my personal ATM." "Then we deserve this vacation," Vivian said coldly. "Without his boring stories about his old travel agency." Her laugh stabbed deeper than any knife could. I stood there, invisible, hearing my own son strip away decades of love and replace it with manipulation. The same boy I'd carried on my shoulders, the same boy whose wedding I paid for, whose children I adored, was laughing at me like I was a joke. My hand trembled on the doorknob. My heart pounded so loud I thought it would give me away. But I didn't move. I just listened, until I couldn't take another word. Then I turned and walked out like a ghost, without the passports, without my pride, without the illusion that I still had a family. In my car, I sat in silence, staring at the dark windshield until tears blurred everything. And for the first time since Rose died, I cried, the kind of cry that shakes your soul and drains everything inside you. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the death of trust, the quiet burial of 34 years of fatherhood. But that night, between those tears and that pain, something inside me broke, and something else woke up. Because when a man has lost everything, even his dignity, what's left is the fire to take it back. I don't remember driving home that night. The world outside my windshield was just a blur of streetlights, tears, and thunder in the distance. My hands gripped the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me alive. When I finally parked outside my small house, everything felt dead. The pictures of my wife Rose on the wall, the quiet ticking of the clock, it all stared back at me like ghosts watching me drown. I sat on the couch and played back every word I'd heard in that kitchen. Every laugh. Every insult. Every cold sentence that came from my own son's mouth. For a long time I just sat there, heartbroken, hollow, and humiliated. But somewhere between midnight and dawn, something changed. Grief began to turn into something sharper. Focus. I remembered the boy I'd raised, ambitious, clever, always trying to get ahead. I remembered the man he'd become, entitled, impatient, and greedy. And then I realized something. Maybe David thought he was clever enough to fool an old man. But he'd forgotten who taught him cleverness in the first place. I spent my whole life building a travel business. I knew every loophole in ticketing, every system for insurance claims, every hidden clause that could make or break a trip. And if he thought he could rob me blind, I would let him believe it. For now. The next morning, I called the travel agency that handled our reservations, Horizon Travels, the same company I'd trained their manager 20 years ago. "Hey, this is Elijah Hawthorne," I said, forcing my voice steady. "I need to make a small change to my upcoming family itinerary." The manager chuckled warmly. "Elijah, the legend himself. What can I do for you?" "I'd like to remove one passenger from the list," I said slowly, "and reroute another flight under a different name." He hesitated. "Sure thing, Mr. Hawthorne. Who are we removing?" "Me," I said. "And instead, I'd like to book Mr. Lewis Denton, first class, separate arrival." Lewis Denton wasn't real. He was a name I'd used for years when testing ticket systems at my agency, a placeholder identity only I knew existed. By evening, the tickets had been changed. David would board a plane believing everything was as planned. He would check into hotels paid under my account. He would smile, thinking he'd gotten away with it. He wouldn't realize I'd already canceled all his cards, removed his access to my accounts, and redirected every refund to a new trust, one under my late wife's name. Rose always used to say, "Don't fight back with anger, fight back with wisdom." That night, I decided to do exactly that. I drafted a letter, sealed it, and placed it in the safety box labeled, "For my family." Inside it, I wrote the truth, everything I discovered, every detail of the betrayal. And at the bottom, I added one line. "When a man loses his respect, he doesn't scream, he rebuilds it in silence." 2 days later, I got a text from David. "Dad, we're boarding now. I'll send you pics when we land. Love you." I stared at the message, the irony of those words twisting in my chest. He thought he was going to enjoy a luxury vacation on my money. What he didn't know was that the moment their plane took off, his world would begin to unravel. I leaned back in my chair and whispered, "Enjoy the trip, son. It's going to be one you'll never forget." Because when betrayal is born out of greed, revenge doesn't come in rage. It comes in silence, wrapped in patience, and served at the perfect moment. The morning their plane landed in Paris, the skies were clear, bright, gold-tinted, and full of promise. David sent me a cheerful voice note. "Hey Dad, we landed safely. Paris is even better than I imagined. Don't worry, we'll take lots of pictures for you." I listened to his voice, calm and smiling, and something inside me twisted, not with hate, but with the bittersweet ache of a father who once would have done anything for that same voice. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The silence was part of the plan. By the time they reached the hotel, La Grande Lumière, the cracks had already started forming. At the check-in desk, the manager frowned at the computer screen. "Sir, I'm afraid there's a problem with your reservation." David chuckled confidently. "That can't be right. It's under my father's account, Elijah Hawthorne, 5-star suite, fully paid." The manager adjusted his glasses and looked up politely. "I'm sorry, sir. This reservation was canceled 2 days ago. There's no payment on file." Vivian's smile vanished. "Canceled? That's impossible. Check again." The manager did, twice. Then he turned the monitor for them to see. The cancellation email glowed clearly. "This booking is no longer active. Refund redirected to primary trust holder, Rose Hawthorne Foundation." Vivian's face drained of color. David's jaw tightened. "There must be a mistake. Call my father." But my phone was off. I made sure of it. They tried their cards next, the same cards connected to my joint account. Declined. Every single one. Maya and Caleb stood beside their parents, confused. "Dad, what's going on?" David forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Nothing, honey. Just a technical glitch. Go sit down, okay?" But behind that smile, panic had begun to bloom. He called his bank, automated voice. He called me again, voicemail. He called the travel agency, disconnected. And then it hit him. He realized something that made the air leave his lungs. This wasn't a system error. This was intentional. For hours, they sat in the hotel lobby surrounded by their luggage, trying to fix the unfixable. By evening, Vivian snapped. You said he'd never find out. You said the money was in our account. David's voice cracked. He must have found out somehow. She stood up, furious. You humiliated us, David. The kids are hungry, the hotel's kicking us out, and you— Keep your voice down, he hissed. We'll figure it out. But he didn't. Because I had already figured it out for him. Back in Atlanta, I sat quietly in my study, sipping coffee, watching the sunset. My old laptop screen showed a live feed from my financial portal, every card frozen, every transfer rerouted. Under my father's old pocket watch lay a single envelope addressed to David. Inside it, one line. You took your father's kindness for weakness. Now learn what it feels like to be powerless. I didn't send it. Not yet. Some lessons aren't meant to be read. They're meant to be lived. That night, I received one last message from him. Desperate, shaky, written in the kind of tone that comes when arrogance turns to fear. Dad, please call me. There's some confusion with the bookings. We're stranded here. Please. The kids are scared. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to respond. The father in me still wanted to protect, to rescue. But the man in me, the one they called the fool, finally understood something my father had once told me. Sometimes, letting them fall is the only way they learn to stand. So I didn't reply. I turned off my phone, leaned back in my chair, and whispered, "Good night, son. Enjoy the world you built on lies." Because some heartbreaks don't need revenge. They need silence and a mirror. By the second day in Paris, David's confidence had evaporated. The man who once bragged about handling everything was now pacing a hotel sidewalk, sweating through his shirt while his kids sat on the curb beside their luggage. Vivian's anger had turned into pure fury. You said this trip was paid for. You said your father would never find out. She snapped, eyes blazing. David rubbed his face with shaking hands. I don't know what happened. Maybe the bank. Oh, stop lying, she shouted. Your father found out, that's what happened. You played him and now we're paying for it. Her voice echoed down the street, drawing stares from passing tourists. Maya and Caleb looked terrified, their laughter gone, replaced by confusion and shame. David walked away from them, pulled out his phone, and called the bank again. Same robotic message. He tried every contact he had. Accountants, agents, even an old friend who worked in finance. Nothing. Every account linked to his father's name was locked. Every path to money had vanished. He stared at his reflection in a cafe window, the face of a man who had everything and lost it in one selfish act. By nightfall, they were sitting in a cheap roadside motel. The room smelled of cigarettes and damp carpet. The kids were silent, Vivian was crying softly, and David sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the dark. The next morning, the hotel manager knocked on their door. Excuse me, sir, but we cannot extend your stay without payment. David tried to smile. Can you give us one more day? I'm expecting funds. The manager's tone hardened. I'm sorry, monsieur, but rules are rules. When the door closed, Vivian glared at him. So what now, David? Are we supposed to sleep on the street? Is this your idea of a vacation? He didn't answer, because for the first time in his life, he didn't have one. Back in Atlanta, I woke up early as usual, made my coffee, fed the birds, and then I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote a letter. On plain white paper, with my father's old fountain pen. The same pen I used to sign the deed of my first business, decades ago. Dear David, I imagine by now you understand what it feels like to be left behind, what it feels like when the people you trust take everything and vanish. That's how I felt that night, when I stood in your kitchen and heard you laughing about the old man who paid for everything. I didn't take your money away to punish you. I took it to show you what it's worth. Money isn't love. It's not respect. It's a tool, and when you use it to manipulate the people who love you, it turns to dust. I'm not angry anymore, son. I'm just disappointed that I failed to raise a man who understood gratitude. I sealed the letter, placed it inside a package with something else, a small photo from years ago. It was me, holding a 6-year-old David on my shoulders, Both of us smiling, holding ice cream cones at the beach. On the back I wrote, "Remember when you were proud to call me Dad?" Then I mailed it to his address in Atlanta, first class, priority delivery. He would get it when he returned. If he returned. That evening, I received a call from an unknown international number. I didn't answer. A few seconds later, a message arrived, broken English from a public cafe Wi-Fi connection. Dad, we're stuck. No money. Please help us. Kids are crying. I'm sorry. I looked at it for a long time. My eyes burned, not from anger, but from the ache only a parent can know. Then I typed my reply. When you're ready to come home, the ticket will be waiting. But this time, son, you'll earn it. And I pressed send. 3 weeks later, a taxi stopped in front of my small house on Peachtree Lane. The engine hummed, then died. The driver stepped out, opened the trunk, and pulled out 2 dusty suitcases. And then, slowly, my son stepped out. David looked older. His face was pale, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes hollowed out by exhaustion. The man who once laughed about his foolish old father now looked like the one who'd been fooled by life itself. Vivian wasn't with him. She'd taken the kids and gone to her sister's place after their flight home. She couldn't forgive him, and I didn't blame her. He stood at the edge of my driveway, clutching his bags, unsure if he even had the right to knock. I saw him through the window before he saw me. For a moment, I considered staying hidden, letting him taste the silence he'd fed me. But then something inside me, something deeper than pride, whispered, "Open the door." So I did. When our eyes met, he froze. "Dad," he whispered, his voice cracked and small. "I don't even know where to begin." I stepped aside quietly. "Then begin with the truth." He hesitated, then walked in, slowly, like a stranger stepping into a church. The house smelled like coffee and wood polish, the same as always. Only now, the silence between us was heavier than ever. He dropped his bags and sat down at the dining table, the same one where we'd once celebrated his first job, his wedding, his kids' birthdays. Now it felt like a courtroom. "I was wrong," he said finally, his voice trembling. "All of it. I don't even know why I did what I did. Maybe I was angry. Maybe I thought you owed me. But after what happened in Paris, after watching my children cry because of my lies, I realized I've been blaming you for a life I ruined myself." He buried his face in his hands. "You didn't deserve that. None of it." I sat across from him, arms folded, eyes steady. "Do you know what hurt the most, David?" I asked softly. It wasn't losing the money. It was realizing that the boy I raised, the boy who once said he wanted to be just like me, turned into someone who laughed at me behind my back. His shoulders shook. Tears slipped through his fingers. "I know," he whispered, "and I hate myself for it. I really do." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Only the old clock ticked in the background, the same rhythm that once counted the happy seconds of our family dinners. Then I said quietly, "Do you remember what your grandfather used to say?" He looked up slowly, eyes red. "About respect?" I nodded. He said, "A man who forgets gratitude will one day kneel to humility." David's lips trembled. "I think I understand now." I leaned forward slightly. "But, because I didn't want to destroy you, son. I wanted to wake you up. Sometimes, losing everything is the only way to see what you already had." He wiped his face and nodded, voice breaking. "Can I ever make it right, Dad?" I reached across the table, my old hands resting on his trembling ones. "You already started the moment you walked through that door." He looked down, unable to speak. Tears fell onto our joined hands, tears not of shame anymore, but of something purer, regret. For a long time, we sat in silence, letting forgiveness settle like sunlight after a storm. Then I said softly, "You'll work with me now, at the community center. No salaries, no shortcuts. You'll help people who've fallen like you did. That's how you'll repay me." He nodded, voice shaking. "I'll do anything." And for the first time in years, I saw the boy I once knew, not the man blinded by greed, but the son who still had a good heart buried somewhere beneath the damage. It had been 4 months since that day. 4 months since the man who once called me a fool had walked back into my life, Not as a son demanding, but as a man learning. Every morning, David showed up at the Maple Street Community Center, where I volunteered after retiring from my travel agency. The place was old, underfunded, and full of people society had forgotten: veterans, widows, single parents, lost teenagers trying to stay off the streets. When he first came, his presence turned heads. A man in an expensive jacket sweeping floors and serving coffee. Some laughed. Some whispered. But David didn't care. He worked quietly, kept his head down, and for the first time in his life, he listened. On his second week, he met Mr. Jenkins, a retired bus driver who'd lost his home and lived in his van. David sat beside him during lunch and asked, "How do you do it? How do you wake up every day and keep smiling?" Mr. Jenkins chuckled softly. "Son, when you've got nothing, every sunrise feels like a gift." That sentence stayed with him. I saw it in his eyes every time he wiped down tables or handed out food packages to families who didn't know where their next meal was coming from. Sometimes, he'd glance at me while working, like a man who didn't know how to say thank you out loud. He didn't have to. His actions were saying it for him. One afternoon, as the volunteers packed up, I found him outside the center, sitting on the old wooden steps, watching the sunset over the playground. He looked tired, not from work, but from emotion. "Long day?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah, but a good one. I met a woman today. She was crying because we gave her food for her kids. She hugged me and said, 'God bless you, son.'" He paused, eyes glistening. "No one's called me son like that in a long time." I smiled faintly. "Feels different when it's earned, doesn't it?" He nodded. "Yeah, it does." We sat there in silence, watching the sky turn gold and crimson. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "Dad, when Mom died, I blamed you. For everything. For not being strong enough, for letting the house fall apart, for being old. I thought if I built a better life, it would fix what was broken. But I ended up breaking everything else instead." My throat tightened, but I said nothing. Sometimes, silence is the only answer that heals. He continued quietly, "I thought money made me powerful. But now I see, it just made me blind." I looked at him, my voice low and steady. "Power doesn't come from what you own, David. It comes from what you can give without expecting anything back." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "Like you always did." For a long time, neither of us moved. The air between us was finally free, no more lies, no more resentment. Just a father and son rebuilding a bridge one plank at a time. 2 weeks later, the community center hosted a fundraiser dinner. David was in charge of organizing it, from setting up tables to collecting donations. He worked tirelessly, and when it ended, the director shook his hand. "You've got a good heart, son. Don't waste it again." That night, David came home late. He handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $12,000. His first earnings from freelance work, all donated to the center. "I wanted to give back," he said softly, "for all the people who gave me a second chance." I smiled. "Including me?" He nodded, eyes wet. "Especially you." And for the first time in years, when I looked at him, I didn't see the man who betrayed me, I saw my son again. Autumn had arrived. The trees on Maple Street were turning gold, just like the years behind me. Every evening I'd sit on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching leaves fall the same way mistakes do, quietly, but beautifully, when you finally let them go. David still came by every morning. Sometimes he brought breakfast, sometimes he just sat beside me without saying a word. That silence, once filled with guilt, had turned into peace. One chilly morning he handed me a small box. "Open it," he said with a nervous smile. Inside was an old compass. The brass was polished, the glass repaired, the initials engraved on the back. My own compass from the travel agency days, the one I'd given him when he left for college. I'd thought he'd sold it years ago. He looked at me, eyes glistening. "I found it in a drawer while cleaning. Thought you might want it back." I turned it in my hands. "You fixed it?" He nodded. "Yeah. I wanted to remind you. I finally found my direction." Those words hit deeper than any apology. I smiled quietly. "No, son. You didn't find it, you earned it. That afternoon, we visited Rose's grave. The grass was still soft, the marble stone framed by wildflowers. David placed a single white rose on it and whispered, "Mom, I messed up. But Dad didn't give up on me. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you're both proud." For the first time, I saw the man my wife always believed he could become. When we drove home, I felt light, like an invisible weight had finally lifted off my chest. Over dinner, I told him, "You know, I used to pray for you to become successful. But now I pray for you to stay kind." He smiled. That's the plan. Weeks turned into months. David kept volunteering, helping rebuild old neighborhoods, mentoring teenagers who reminded him of his younger self. The city started calling him Mr. Hawthorne's son again, not because of the money, but because of the man he'd become. One evening, I recorded a video message for him, and for anyone who'd ever been betrayed by their own. I set the camera on my desk, pressed record, and spoke from the heart. Life has a strange way of teaching us through pain. Sometimes the people we love hurt us not because they're evil, but because they're lost. You can't fix their mistakes with anger. You fix them with patience, example, and truth. I learned that forgiveness doesn't make you weak, it makes you free. And if you're watching this thinking someone owes you love or respect, remember, love can't be demanded. It's earned through gratitude. Be the kind of person who forgives, not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace. I paused, looked straight into the lens, and finished. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who's fighting to rebuild theirs. Like this video, subscribe, and remember, the greatest wealth you can leave behind isn't money. It's mercy, integrity, and the courage to forgive. I turned off the camera and leaned back, the house quiet except for the old clock ticking softly, the same clock that had witnessed betrayal, silence, and now healing. Outside, the street lights flickered on, one by one. David's car pulled up, and I heard his voice calling, "Dad, you ready for dinner?" I smiled, stood up, and whispered to myself, "I'm ready." Because this time, my story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about redemption, the kind that begins where bitterness ends. Forgive when it's hardest. Teach through patience. And never measure love in dollars. Measure it in actions. Speech balloon. If this story moved you, share it. Subscribe for more true stories that remind us, kindness always comes home.